Hey, Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. On this show, we talk about everything crowdfunding. We get into how to successfully raise money on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, equity crowdfunding, you name it. And the goal, why I started this podcast, was really to understand what is happening behind the scenes. There's only so much you can do when it comes to, learning and reading and stuff. Eventually, you actually have to ask real people and explore and research kind of the phenomena that are happening. So when I see a result, when I see someone successfully raise money, or I see a really interesting product that's being made, killer design, amazing manufacturing, I'm like, how'd they do that? Like, how did that happen? And I'm sure that you see the same thing where you just see a product and you're like, wow, that's incredible. I just want to know like what went into making that. Who did they partner with? What tools did they use? How did they get this thing made? And that's really what I created this show for, is to show you the insider scoop to a crowdfunding campaign and what is happening behind the scenes. So a lot of great interviews I have out there when it comes to marketing and when it comes to getting traffic and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to use today's interview actually to delve a little bit more in depth into the creation side of a product. So specifically when it comes to manufacturing, when you're trying to get your product manufactured in a different country, how to go about doing that. So when it comes to China, like what should you know about factories in China if you want to get your product manufactured? Also, aside from just, finding a factory, how do you, in any kind of meaningful way, protect your intellectual property? What are some of the ways and some of the things that you can do when it comes to your manufacturing that can actually, I think, have a massive impact on the overall costs of delivering your product to the end backer and to the end user? So this isn't as much of like as a sexy topic as marketing. I love talking about marketing, obviously, but I really did think this was a very important topic for you, particularly if you're an entrepreneur out there in the audience, you have a prototype and you're looking to get this manufactured, or you want to get better rates for your manufacturing. I think this could be a really useful episode for you. That being said, I also have a great audiobook out there called the Kickstarter Launch Formula, which is available on Audible. This is basically like an end-to-end framework for launching a Kickstarter campaign. It is literally a formula. That's why I call it the Kickstarter Launch Formula. So it's meant to not only give you lots and lots of confidence going into your campaign, but also the exact know-how from the strategy, the techniques, the tools you can use, all that kind of stuff. I put that into the Kickstarter Launch Formula. You can go and grab a copy at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. As well as, if you stick around to the end of the show, I will tell you how you can work one-on-one with me if you're interested in doing that for your upcoming launch. That being said, let's dive into this episode of the podcast. We're talking with the CEO of MorphoMFG, an expert and leader when it comes to getting crowdfunded products manufactured. This podcast episode is sponsored by The Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They are Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns, and if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Josh, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So to get started here, you've been doing this a while now in the industry. What are some of the questions that people who are looking to get a product manufactured that they come to you and answer? What are some of those common questions?
So I think there's some spoken ones and some unspoken ones, and I'll do a bit of a combo for what types of questions people ask us. So the first one is, do we really need you, right? I made the mistake in thinking I could do everything myself when I started, not realizing how hard it was. And really the success of our company is built upon how hard it is and clients not knowing what they don't know. They think that they can manage the onboarding and development of their products themselves and choose to go elsewhere. So that's usually the hardest part, is making people realize that it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and a lot of experience to do the China product manufacturing thing right. Mm-hmm. The second one is, why are you wanting to get involved with one of the words I hate the most, a middleman, right? What are the costs that are going to be involved with that? Are they charging too much, et cetera, et cetera? And I've always thought that that's a bit of a penny wise, pound foolish type of attitude to developing it, right? If you're going to build your own custom house, you're not going to build the whole thing yourself, right? You have to find subcontractors, specialists that can help you put the whole piece of the puzzle together and make sure that you guys, that you're going to be delivering on something that's really, really amazing.
When it comes,
yeah, go ahead. My bad.
I was going to say, when it comes to people who have done manufacturing before, at least one of the common questions I get is like, we did this, we figured out how to source the product, but then you get it and it's not always the right quality, right, that you want it. And it's kind of hard, I think. Quality control, particularly when you're producing like hundreds or thousands of products, is very difficult. Is that your experience too?
Yeah, 100%, right? It's got to be set up from the get-go, right out of the gates. I was going to touch on this point a little bit later, but it's actually perfect timing. When you start a project, the key is all details. And I've talked about this a lot recently. When people say something like, I want my product to be red, it's easy to say they want it to be red. And then the typical situation is a factory will make the product red, and it will come out a shade of red that people didn't expect and they didn't want. And, people will be upset and say that China did it wrong, this factory did it wrong. But in reality, it just wasn't specific enough. And so one of the main things that, I try to tell people as they're getting into manufacturing in China is the devil's in the details, right? You got to cover every single base. And if you do, usually you're left in a pretty good spot.
So that kind of communication of not just the color, but also the feel of the product and everything like that. What happens when like you get one product and it's like the right shade of red, but then you get more products in the future and it's just like not always up to par? Like, how do you maintain quality control?
Yeah, so the way to navigate that is with what we call a quality control standard document. And when you get that document set up in place, not just with one party within the supply chain, but within all parties of the supply chain, everybody knows what they're working on. And so, I'm never going to sit here and profess that there's never problems in manufacturing. There always is. There's always hiccups. There's always speed bumps. But when you lay out the groundwork for the entire product, for the entire supply chain, before you pay them $1, everyone knows what expectations need to be hit. And when the individual members of the supply chain don't hit those expectations, everyone knows where the liability lies. And it's much easier to solve the problems when that's the case.
So creating a document in order to set expectations. What did you call that document again?
Quality Control Standard Document, QCSD.
Okay, and
that's for us. I don't think that's an industry standard. That's just what we call it.
For those expectations, could you give us an idea of like what that might be?
All right, cool. So I have a glasses case right in front of me, a leather glasses case, Ray-Bans case, right? You want to know, not that you're making a black leather case for a pair of sunglasses. You want to know the exact pattern of the material that's cut out to the millimeter, right? The more detailed you are, the more likely you're going to end up with something that you're happy with. You want to know what kind of gloss you want on the button. You want to know the size, the logo, and the color of the logo that's on the front. You want to know how it folds. You want to know what kind of durability. Obviously, that's a lot of things to go on in a podcast. Mm-hmm. But I think the most important thing is to realize that there are so many more details that people don't account for than that they do. And it's always better to just go the extra mile and cover every single base.
So let's just say that you have all of that into a quality control document, and then the factory is there and they're making a bunch of these, right? A bunch of these sunglass cases. Do you recommend people go and like sample these before they ship them all the way around the world to your fulfillment company? Or like at what point in time do you check that?
Yeah, so I would say with that document, you create your first prototype. And when that prototype comes out, the document should be detailed enough that when you see the prototype, you know if it's good or not. Sometimes that takes 2 or 3 tries, right? But if you have that document, the factories know that they made the mistake and then you're not forced to pay for future prototypes until they get it right. Once they get it right, all parties sign on the dotted line. We all agree that this is what it needs to be, and quality control happens the entire way rather than just at the end.
How long do you think that takes from the point of contacting a factory to getting a really good prototype that you're happy with?
So it's very product dependent, right? I mean, some things, like using the sunglass case, for example, you could get in a week if it's not too complex. If you're trying to make, one of our more recent products that we're working on is smart cheese maker. You just dump all the recipe in, press a button on your app, and it makes some cheese. That could be 6 months, right? So I think there's a pretty wide spectrum of expectations. It kind of depends too much on what the product is.
And once you have that prototype that you really like, do you then just kind of trust the factory to, okay, now we're going to do an order of 500 of these? Or is there any other quality control that happens?
To me, it's all in that document, because in China, if it exists on paper and it's signed by all parties, it is law, and that is enforceable with lawyers. If you don't have that paper, though, then there's too much trust that is relied on to make it happen. And I'd much prefer, while I do trust almost all of our suppliers, right, even the new ones, we audit them, very deep in a very detailed SOP, and we try to make sure we're always working with people that are legitimate. I much prefer a trustless transaction where you don't need to trust people, and it's all laid out legally on paper. Everybody knows what the expectations are.
When it comes to those people that have done manufacturing before, so one thing obviously is quality control is very difficult. So if you've done it once yourself, you're like, this is really hard to figure out and maintain. What's another reason you think that people opt to go with, a third party provider to help with that when they've already done manufacturing once?
I think it's just the question of doing what you do best, right? I think understanding where your world-class abilities are is something that I think every business person should know. And so, for example, if one of our customers comes to us with this incredibly designed product, aesthetically beautiful, it's something that a lot of people will catch on to, they shouldn't spend their time manufacturing, right? They should do I mentioned earlier, like a house, and subcontract the pieces that they're not world-class at. So as our company develops, we're starting to work more and more with people who have defined themselves what they're great at and want to subcontract out the other pieces so that they can focus on the things they do best.
As it relates to design, how are people, or at what stage rather, are people approaching you? Do they already have the CAD designs and it's fully formed? Do they have a design on a napkin? When are they approaching you with the design process?
So I'm sure this is a trend that you've realized too. Kickstarter and Indiegogo, when I first met you, Sal, was everybody just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what's stuck. Now, crowdfunding has turned more into 5 to 10 person teams pre-launch. So it's kind of developed and evolved from people coming to us with napkin sketches and asking us to solve all their problems, to people coming to us, like you said, with full CAD drawings, full 3D engineering files, knowing everything that they need and just trying to find a great partner.
Okay, so for the average person, you think they should be at that stage kind of before they engage your service?
I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question because, we consider ourselves a turnkey solution, and we have engineers, in Guangzhou that work with us every day. And they're great. And, we can provide those services, engineering, rendering. I just see now more of a trend that these 7-figure campaigns are starting to be a bit more prepared. So I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. It's just more the way that I see the industry moving.
Do you see China as being the future when it comes to manufacturing? Or what if you're doing an apparel item? Should you still look at China, or are there other regions of the world?
Depends on the complexity. So we just in this last year have been moving to Vietnam for, like you said, apparel, textiles, etc. Some of the more simple things. Those companies in China, they just can't compete with the margins, and they're not really interested to. So complex, even textile apparel products, I think there's still a place for China. But for things that are very simple, not only is China not a great idea, China's not even interested, right? Those factories know that the margins, they just can't compete. So bit of a catch-22. I think China is the future, but only for very high-end products.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is changing when it comes to the middle class, right? Because there's a growing middle class in China, and manufacturing, that whole game is just changing in general. Speaking of like manufacturing this time, have you noticed any differences in this climate when it comes to like coronavirus and everything that's going on?
Yeah, what's funny is I was really worried, right? First, China, all of the corona and all of that coming out, and then the protests and all of these different things that are happening in the world climate right now. I was worried for the health of my company. But what I found, surprisingly enough, is that I think it was kind of like the toilet paper apocalypse, right? And that kind of turned into inventory for our customers. Our customers thought, we don't know where China's going to be in 6 months. We better stock up on inventory and make sure we have enough to ride this wave and make sure we get it out. So we actually had record Q1 and record Q2 back to back, which really surprised me because I was worried the exact opposite would happen.
I mean, you also see that with like Amazon stock, where lots of people are ordering tons of stuff off of Amazon, and it's oddly enough like a different effect than I think most people, anticipated.
Yeah, at the end of the day, people are stuck at home and they're bored. And so they want to buy new headphones. They want to buy home workout equipment. They want to buy all of the things right now that are really blasting off in Amazon.
When it comes to the actual products, right, and you're launching this campaign and these things, I think just the biggest headache and the biggest worry is the fact that you can very easily have your idea ripped off in China. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that is actually the cornerstone of my entire business model. I realized like early on with some of the big crowdfunding campaigns that we worked on, Fidget Cube, we didn't work on Fidget Cube, but that was like a good case study for us, is I realized that, these things were replicatable and people were coming in, factories were coming in and copying ideas even before they hit the market. And so, I just looked at who didn't get copied. And the biggest example of that is Apple. And so I networked around, I met some people at Foxconn, and I reverse engineered what Apple really did to make their products uncopyable. And we've done our own version of that and made it accessible to small and startup companies. And we call it the component control method. And so the three main benefits you get out of it is, number one, we work only with specialists, right? You look at the iPhone has hundreds of components. And Foxconn doesn't go in and give all of that product to one factory. They chop it up and give each of the individual components to factories that specialize just in that component. So using the iPhone as an example, they've got the camera, they've got the battery, they've got the screen, they've got the case. They use individual factories for each of those components. So the first benefit you get is you're working with specialists, so you're guaranteed super high quality. The second is kind of by proxy price, right? We personally don't compete on price because we want to make super high-end products. But by not having a ton of middlemen in the middle with their finger in the pie, you end up with a fairly competitive price. And then three, to your point, this entire thing is just revolving around IP protection. When you work with individual component factories, nobody sees the big picture. Nobody has all the design files. Nobody really knows what their component is turning into from a product perspective. And because of that, they don't really care, right? They just want to make their margins on their components, make amazing components, and hope that you continue to up your order size. And then we assemble at a third-party location. So no one really sees what they're doing. No one really cares, right? They just want to make their margin. And by setting it up like that, I'm in no way saying that no one will ever copy our customers' products. If they're very successful, they will. But they're going to have to wait for it to hit the market, buy the product, and then reverse engineer it. So it'll take, 4 to 6 months for anybody to even be able to copy it, giving people plenty of runway to run their show.
Do you do anything on the way of the fulfillment side? Because you mentioned like putting together the product. Like, do you also ship these out to the people's customers, or do you just deliver like a bulk order to then like a fulfillment center?
Yeah, it kind of depends, right? Like I said earlier, we want to be a turnkey solution. We can, but I'm also very transparent and honest in the things that we're amazing at, and logistics and fulfillment aren't one of them. But we're good at it, right? We're better than most people, and it's certainly a service that we can help provide and offer.
Can you tell us about like 1 or 2 projects that you've worked on when it comes to Kickstarter, Indiegogo? Are you looking for help with the fulfillment side of your rewards on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or any other crowdfunding website? Fulfillrite is literally the gold standard when it comes to crowdfunding reward fulfillment. These guys will help you ship out your products, your packages, your orders to all of your customers and your backers. They've been working in this industry for a really long time. I totally vouch for their services, and they'll even do things like answer simple questions for you on fulfillment and shipping and figuring out how to get your products into the hands of your customers in the easiest way possible. If you're interested in learning more about them, you can go to fulfillrite.com or crowdcrux.com/fulfillrite, and that will take you to them. Again, that is FULFILLRITE.com.
Sure. So I think giving them the most recent examples are probably the most beneficial. One of my favorite customers right now is a company called Last Object. They launched Last Swab, and then more recently they launched Last Tissue. So they've done millions of dollars across Indiegogo and Kickstarter. They're basically taking single-use objects like a Q-tip and turning them into things that you can use for a long time, protect the environment. It's efficient. It's cost efficient for the buyers. They're fantastic. We've done a lot of their manufacturing since they started. And then the second one, which I'm, particularly excited about, is a company called Formaggio. They raised about $1 million across their Indiegogo and Kickstarter campaign. And it's basically a smart home cheese maker. So you dump all of the ingredients into this machine, and it churns out cheese. Really great. The guy's a genius. Super brilliant idea. Super excited to make it come to fruition.
Were these people approaching you after their campaign was finished or like beforehand?
So when I started the business, it was all people coming to me during their campaign. As we've kind of evolved and crowdfunding's evolved, I'm hoping that it's more and more people coming to us with their ideas so that we can help them bake in proper timelines and proper costs, right? It's too often that we get a great campaign with a great product that isn't really prepared because somebody's giving them the wrong pricing or the wrong timelines. And then we're just trying to fix stuff all the time. Which is fine, right? That's something that we excel at. But my hope is that people will reach out to us more and more pre-campaign so that we can help them set everything up in a reasonable manner.
So when people come to you and like they've obviously already done their research on what to charge for the product, do you ever like surprise them and like, we can actually get this for you for less money or anything like that?
I'm a huge proponent of quality over price. Like I mentioned earlier, the penny wise, pound foolish thing is something that I hold dear to my heart, right? I'd rather see people spend more money up front and be able to grow, a 6, 7, 8 figure business rather than, pinching pennies at the beginning. But, like I said, with what we're doing with the component control method, yeah, oftentimes our price does come in cheaper, and that's obviously a great surprise and a positive benefit for everybody involved.
That sounds cool because like if you end up running a campaign, you have a sense of what your margins are. And then you have smarter intelligence with feet on the ground, and you're like, wow, we were estimating really far more than it should be actually. Or you're not taking into account all of these other ways in which you could save money or be more efficient with your process and such.
Yeah, I think that's a question with scaling, right? I think out of the gates, the best solution is to work with us or somebody like us for that matter. Figure out exactly what your COGS are, your cost of goods sold. Figure out where your margins lie. Figure out when your timelines can actually hit so you don't have upset backers. Those things are super important. And then as you scale, right, a new initiative that we're basically taking is trying to help our customers grow from 1 million to 100 million. And that's obviously not a ton of customers that have done that with us so far. But that's when you start really nailing down the costs and figuring out that, you know, a penny saved here is actually a ton of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. For you, I guess, specifically, what do you enjoy most about this process?
Right now, I'm starting to create some of my own brands. It's been a long time coming. I love doing this for other people, but I have an amazing core, right? We're now 35 people deep. I think that was probably a third the last time we actually spoke on the podcast. So we've been growing really, really well, and I'm excited to start creating some of my brands with some of our most successful customers as partners.
Okay, by that, do you mean like putting out your own products kind of?
Yeah, so I basically looked at, you know, the Pareto law, like the 80-20 law.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at our customers and realized, you know, 20% of them were creating 80% of the revenue. And so I talked to them and I said, you know, let's start some of our own brands together. And then within those companies, there were only a couple people that were really driving the growth. And so I've partnered with about 15 of them, and we're hoping to be able to launch a brand every quarter for the next foreseeable future.
What do you think those people are doing right?
It's different, right? Some brands have a graphic designer that's amazing. And so it was easy for me to be like, he's the guy driving this ship. Let's bring him in. Some guys have an e-commerce conversion optimization guy that's amazing. And so it was easy to pull them in. And so I just kind of analyzed what each of our customers were doing right, and then reached out to those people individually in the hope that they would be interested in this bigger vision.
So it seems like, as you mentioned, like there's one person that's kind of spearheading the success of each of these products, right?
Yeah.
And then it's almost like are you then incorporating them, partnering with them kind of as a new business entity, or are you working off of the other customer base or?
Yeah. So we're setting up basically joint ventures, JVs with a combination of these people for each brand, and then really drilling in on the things they do best and setting up these launches 4 times a year.
Very interesting. Have you noticed any kind of trends at all that you'd like to share?
In terms of
like e-commerce, the products that you see that are kind of taking off.
I'm a big believer in like high quality, right? We're not there yet, but I'd eventually like MorphoMFG's tagline to be making the Rolls Royce and the Rolexes of whatever industry you're in. And so I think there were like a few different phases. I think back in the day, products were made with such high quality and so in tune with what they needed to be. And then there was like this cheap China phase where rather than having one really nice t-shirt, you had 20 different t-shirts from the dollar store. And I think that was like pretty common for most people. I think the trend is that people want less stuff, you know, as apartments get smaller and more expensive. I think people want less stuff that will last a long time, that will stand out and make them feel, you know, more important and be a part of something bigger than a cheap pair of headphones from the dollar store.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I completely agree. And the importance of quality. And you also see that as well when it comes to Kickstarter, Indiegogo. You know, the campaigns are so much more polished. Have you noticed any kind of like trends at all when it comes to Kickstarter, Indiegogo?
I think the word you just used is perfect, right? Before you saw so many sloppy campaigns. Now you see a really polished look, right? These campaigns are well put together. The quality of the product is evident. And I think sometimes they just need that final step, which is making the product look as good as it does in the video.
When it comes to people who, maybe can't afford your service or they're still trying to do manufacturing themselves, what advice can you impart to those individuals?
So I mentioned it earlier, but I think the most important is massive amounts of details, right? We have a big sign in our office that says objectivity is greater than subjectivity. And, like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, too often people say, I want it to be red. And then when it comes back a different red, they're upset. But in reality, it's their fault for not defining the specifics of what they wanted. So number one piece of advice is know what you want, right? Don't come to your factory and say, I want, kind of like this. They will respect you for coming at them with tons of details, and a very small fraction of people are prepared to do that. So that's definitely my number one piece of advice.
Be all about the details, yeah.
Everything, right? Every single thing that you can think of. And then when you think you're done, go back, reanalyze, and find 10 more points that you think could mess up, because Chinese are unforgiving if you forget details. But if you know everything, Chinese are some of the most savvy and incredible business people I've ever met.
Well said, well said. And for those that are interested in working with you, can you give us an idea of what do you guys charge? What are your services like?
Sure. So when I started the company, after, I think we talked about this on the last podcast, after I started the company, I had just come out of a super big bankruptcy, not bankruptcy, but I was broke. You can't say bankruptcy when you're a one-man show in China with no money. But I had no cash, and that really ruined me. And so when I started Morpho, I wanted to create a company that could be there for those types of people. And that's still the goal. But we have an onboarding fee. We have 3 phases. The onboarding phase, which is usually about $5,000. We have the development phase, which we figure out in the onboarding phase how much it costs, right? It could be anywhere from a few hundred to $250,000, depending on the complexity of the development. And then for mass manufacturing, we work with our clients to figure out what their target price is per unit, and then we bake our costs right in there.
Okay, so you kind of work backwards towards the end of that, figuring out their cost. So
yeah, as much as I'd love to just, we get 100 different leads per week of people that want to make products. And it's kind of just a barrier to entry. I have created teams that will be so committed to people's product and really dump a ton of both human and capital resources into making these people's projects a success. Mm-hmm. I just want to ensure that they're as committed as we were going to be.
Okay. And for the second phase, can you go through the second phase again?
Yeah. So the second phase is development. There's obviously a big bevy of different things that could be happening, right? It's design, development, 3D engineering, 3D rendering, prototyping, molds, tooling. Basically everything between the onboarding phase and mass production is all in the development. And there's so many different variables dependent on what is this product? What industry is it in? Do we need plastic tooling injection? Or is it just a piece of leather that we can cut out of a fabric and call it a day?
Okay. So it's also kind of figuring out what stage the entrepreneur is at and how you can help if they need those things already or
yes,
not.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very well said. Awesome, man. Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing some great tips. Do you have any parting resources or bits of advice that you think people should check out?
Let me think about it. Bits of advice.
Yeah. Any other things I should have asked you that I didn't get in?
This maybe you couldn't have asked me, but this is one of my favorite quotes. I believe it is the great Warren Buffett. Right now we're in a world of turmoil, And what I've realized is that from this quote is, when people are fearful, be greedy. And when people are greedy, be fearful. And I think right now with the current world climate, people are fearful. And I think right now more than ever is the time to create people's dreams, is the time to create the product that you've wanted to do for 3 years, because people are still buying. People are still buying, but the competition is a lot less and people's attitude seems to be a lot more grim. So if you do have a product idea, I think now is the time to hit it and hit it as hard as you can.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. I'll be sure to link you up in the show notes and all of that, and make sure that people can go and check out Morpho.
Appreciate it, Sal.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. I hope that you have a killer weekend coming up here. We're coming up on July 4th weekend. So I hope that it's really fun for you. You get some time to relax, and also you think about whether or not you really want to get into this game, because I think that honestly, right now we're seeing a massive resurgence in the number of Kickstarter campaigns that are being launched. So a couple of months ago, we kind of saw a dip, right, in overall the stock market, in number of new creators that are launching projects. But at the same time, e-commerce, as you can see, is thriving more than ever before. Like Amazon is now going to be, one of the most expensive companies out there if you want to invest in it. But also Jeff Bezos is going to be like a massive, billionaire. People think that Amazon is going to be like the first $1 trillion company. All these crazy things, and we see this also happening with Kickstarter, where more and more creators are launching products and projects and continuing to get backers. So this is a really good time, I think, to launch a campaign. And I hope that some of the stuff that was shared in today's podcast will help you do that, will help you accelerate this process, and also working with a team in order to get your product manufactured. If you do want a little bit of help when it comes to figuring out the best way to market your product, how do you get traffic, how do you get funding, how do you do a pre-launch, all these little nitty-gritty things that go into a successful crowdfunding campaign, I can help you with that. All you got to do is book a one-on-one coaching call with me. These calls are meant to be, first of all, helpful, educational, look over your resources, give you feedback, whatever stage you're in. And they've never had someone who hasn't been on a call that said like it was extremely helpful. So first of all, they're meant to be helpful. They're also a way in which I can tell you if you're interested, how I can partner with you with your project, how I can help you with your project going forward. But they're really meant to be something that, after doing this call, you're going to feel a lot more confident. You're going to know exactly the steps you need to take going forward, some of the milestones you have to hit, and also some of the stuff you might not be aware of. I'll try to introduce you to key resources, key players, things that can, I think, accelerate your campaign, that can help you out, that you might not have heard about on one of these podcast episodes. If that sounds interesting to you, go and book a one-on-one coaching call with me. You can go to crowdcrux.com/coaching to access the link for that call. As crowdcrux.com/coaching. Crowdcrux.com/coaching will take you there. You can give me a little bit of information about you, your project. You can tell me like what you're looking to raise money for, what type of category do you have, and we can get that squared away ASAP in a 1 hour long intensive call. But that being said, I hope you enjoy some of the other episodes I got out there on the podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman. Have a great July 4th weekend, and I will see you next time.